We've got a great panel today and a very interesting topic, learning ecosystems and looking at new models, technology, and culture. I will not do hardly any more talking than a minute or so. We've got a fantastic panel to do that. Let me introduce them very briefly, and we'll have them do a sort of a 30-second self-intro pitch, starting with Mr. Santiago Iñiguez. He's the president of IE University. Santiago, welcome.
Thanks very much, Kumar, and thanks very much for arranging all the logistics for this panel and preparing the questions. The clap was also a recognition for your understanding and patience following, our presentations today. But anyway, I'm president at IE University. I was the former dean at IE Business School, and I've worked on a number of issues and areas related to executive education, diversity, business schools, and other related fields. So what I hope is that you enjoy the presentation and the rest of the panel, of course.
Thanks. Next, we have Sandy Stelling. She's the Managing Director, Business Transformation for Alaska Airlines. Sandy?
So thanks for having me here today. This is it's a great day, too. I think this panel is going to be exciting. I'm looking forward to listening and learning from this group. I would say Alaska Airlines is based in Seattle, Washington, home of a lot of other brands mentioned here, Microsoft, Amazon, and we'll get into that when we talk about learning. I've been with Alaska Airlines for 20 years, and my background is I'm a mechanical systems engineer. So as we play into what that takes about learning and where we need to go in the 21st century, I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Sandy. Next, we have Mr. Njeto-Rodriguez, who's an author, speaker, and an advisor to several large businesses.
Thank you, Kumar. So a pleasure to be here as well. Amazing setting, amazing room, amazing people. So I look forward for the discussion. My passion is projects, is how can we get better in projects, personal projects, corporate projects, or societal projects. How can we use projects to generate value for businesses, for society, and how we see projects as ecosystems. So I publish, I research, I teach, I speak, and I work on this topic.
Thanks, Antonio. And finally, we have So-Young Kang, who's the founder and CEO of Gnowbe Solutions. So-Young?
Thanks, Kumar. So my name is So-Young. I'm actually really passionate about how we can address this global challenge of the skills gap that's growing. And how do we actually humanize technology in order to deliver powerful learning experiences at scale, both for countries as well as for companies. And so I'm really passionate about transformation and how do we actually drive systemic change in both mindsets, not just in skills, as well as ultimately behaviors, which is where we can grow knowledge into being, which is what it's really all about in terms of how we raise human consciousness and then use technology as a key enabler to do so. So I'm looking forward to this conversation, and thank you, Kumar, for setting this up.
Thanks. Over the past day or so, we've been hearing a lot of interesting views on ecosystems, design, construct, what is the possible evolution of ecosystems, partnerships, contributors. In terms of learning ecosystems, I just wanted to set the context. On one hand, if you see, we've got a whole lot of change going on, both in terms of academia as well as business. So you've got digitization, AI, robotics, a very fast-changing consumer landscape. What does that mean for business? On the other hand, you've got MOOCs, distributed e-learning. What does that mean for academia? How does academia keep pace with the real world and get people ready, to run these businesses? What does that mean for management thinking, leadership development? On one hand, now you've got people who are veering towards what they call as the gig economy, right? More and more freelance work, project work. So these are people who are no longer tied to one employer all year round. So who looks after their learning, development, managerial needs? On the other hand, within organizations, you've got distributed teams, flexi workforces, people working from homes. How do you look after them? How do you inculcate the kind of culture, talent that you need for an everlasting organization. And to discuss some of these areas, we've got a fantastic panel. I will start with you, Santiago. You've got some great thoughts to begin with.
Thank you, Kumaar. I'm going to use some slides in order to present my main thesis, which has to do with diversity. I mean, the thesis is that diversity enhances innovation at any ecosystem. And I have a number of evidence pieces here in my presentation that I would like to share with you. But let me start by mentioning two types of diversity. Diversity is a very contested concept. I guess we all support the need of diversity in our organizations, but then people don't agree about what diversity is in many cases. And different countries use diverse categories of diversity. So in order to speak the same language, I normally propose two different concepts, which are demographic, that has to do with gender, age, nationality, culture. And the other major one is personality and value-based, which is very important because it also produces lots of innovation. And we sometimes tend to confuse both levels. In terms of the justification of why diversity is important, because we, in principle, we all endorse diversity. But diversity has two major justifications. One is the business case, which is, has to do with a consequentialist edge. The idea is to justify diversity on the basis of the results that it produces in organizations, increasing profits, increase in visibility in the presence of different markets. In the end, you know, this is a very economic argument. The idea is that every time we enhance diversity, then the results at companies improve. And allow me just to quote this finding of McKinsey, one of the consultants at McKinsey. McKinsey, as you know, has been producing a number of reports over the years on diversity at organizations. And over time, they were able to link the results of companies on different KPIs, economic KPIs, and how diverse were those companies, from their boards down to the bottom line. And what they found is that this is actually a finding of 2015, but this has actually increased over time, is that for every 10% improvement in gender diversity, they see a 2 to 4% increase in profits. This is just, you know, a reason that, of course, supports the case for diversity. But from this standpoint, which is the business case, linking, and sorry for the typo because it shouldn't say diversification, but diversity. The second justification for diversity is actually the moral case. I was referring to the business case, linking, you know, economic facts with introducing, implementing diversity measures. The second one is the moral case that has to do with implementing diversity policies because it's a question of justice, it's a question of fairness. And this is something that has other grounds, more philosophical, another vision of the world. When I speak to CEOs and other decision makers at companies, what I find is that most of the CEOs tend to justify diversity on the business case, related to what are the consequences, economic or related to the results of the company. But they many times forget about this very basic justification, which has to do with the duty to be fair and to be just. So, in my opinion, given that many times it's not easy to link results with one particular policy, and that in the end, the success of any diversity policy not just depends on whether it's conceived in its level of formulation in good terms, but also in terms of how it's implementing, we should also appeal to this very important ground of justification, which is diversity as a moral question, as a moral issue. So we should appeal to both levels of justification. But then let me now jump to another very fascinating area of diversity, which has to do with cultural diversity. And I will share with you the findings of an exercise that I've undertaken over the years. I teach on a very diverse group of managers, But I also teach on a Chinese CEO group that comes from a leading business school in China to Madrid every year. And I've collected over the years the opinions that each of the two constituencies have. On the one hand, what Western managers think about doing business in China, about their Chinese colleagues. And this is a list that compiles their comments, their conclusions, their opinions, their cliches about how Chinese do business. Of course, you may be familiar with many of them. I'm not going to go through the list. But as you see, they more or less conform a cliché that many of us have about Chinese, about how they do business, how they get into negotiations or deals. On the other hand, I've done the same exercise with Chinese when they come to visit us in Madrid. And it's very curious because if you go through the list, their opinions and judgments and cliches about what they think about Western managers, they very much reflect, they mirror to some extent what many people here think about the Chinese. I mean, they criticize us because they consider we are lazy, we don't speak Chinese, we, of course, take for granted many things. So maybe the conclusion of this exercise over the years is, first, we need to learn more about diversity across cultures. But second, that there are probably many more things in common than the things that separate us. So let me just conclude by formulating two takeaways from this very brief, presentation, and I'll be delighted to share with you many more comments afterwards. The first takeaway is that it's essential, in our opinion, to cultivate the humanities. We need to learn more about the other cultures. We need to study maybe Chinese as well, but of course to try to pronounce at least their Chinese names in their own language, because they make the effort of translating, as you know, their own names into Western names. No? But anyway, cultivate the humanities would be the first takeaway. The second one is to take lifelong learning seriously. We need to adapt constantly to the new world, and I encourage you to go back to school, because learning from the youngsters and sharing desks with them might be something very refreshing that may even, and Kumaar knows about this a lot, they may even renew your neurons. So anyway, thanks very much.
Thank you, Antonio. The next time you're presenting the set of slides, can you also do one on misconceptions that Indians have? I'd like to be able to contribute to that set of slides as well, being from India. But, some great thoughts there, great thoughts. Sandy, over to you.
Sure. I can tell already we're going to have a good, diverse, rich conversation. I'm going to take a different approach, probably because I don't come from academia. I would say I'm absolutely in a practitioner space, working in corporate America my entire career. A little bit about Alaska, because there is some mystery here. Alaska Airlines, we're the 5th largest airline in the United States, but I want to highlight it's a distant 5th. I just want to set the context of the challenges we face. The other 4 airlines, United, American, Delta, Southwest, make up over 70% of domestic market. So we're a distant 5th at 7% of the market. So that puts us in a scrappy fighting position that we've been in since the airline was born, if you would, in 1932. We're based in Seattle with our roots in Alaska, which speaks a lot to our culture, which I think will come into some of the challenges we face and some of the opportunities we see. My time there, I have been a perpetual change agent, and that puts me in a unique position where the majority of the leaders in our organization have grown up there as functional leaders in the organization. We talk about a lot in the last 2 days about our people and how important people are. Our people are 100% our brand. You cannot travel on our airline and not interact with our employees at the airport, on board the aircraft. So you may book your ticket through digital platforms, and that's in anticipation of a trip. Then when you travel, those moments of truth are when you're interacting with our employees, and those really take hold of the memories you have of your experience working with us. So we understand that the people really are the heart of our brand, and we have to invest in them and our leaders as we go forward. Some of our actual people challenges, and we talk about learning is we talk about talent acquisition. We have to make sure we have full pipelines. So how, from a learning ecosystem, do we work with schools and organizations to prepare people to join our workforce? They anticipate and are experiencing a significant pilot shortage. The same is true for aircraft mechanics. And as I mentioned, I'm from Seattle, so we have healthy competition when it comes to bringing in software engineers to work for an airline when we're competing with Amazon and Microsoft and the like. We also have to talk about retention and what that means for our employees. We are a high-tenured company. I've been there 20 years, and I'm junior, just to give you a sense, which really speaks a lot to the culture and why people do stay. But it also says that as times are changing, is that something that we get to hold on to, or do we have to prepare for a different dynamic of our workforce? A little bit about, again, contextually for this discussion, we've just come through 5 years of exceptional growth. So again, we're 87 years old, but in the last 5 years, we've doubled in size. We've gone from about 11,000 employees to 23,000 employees. That's through organic and M&A. We acquired Virgin America. Between those two growth trajectories, we're here today, and we're a little confused. We woke up, I mentioned to, and beforehand, the panel, that I describe us in the post-merger hangover. We've done all of the work to complete the merger, and we're sort of looking around going, who are we now? Where are we trying to go? And most importantly, do we have the leaders and employees fit to take this company where we need to go? So that really, from a learning subject, becomes really important. And as I said earlier, we have a history. You guys know about the United States. It's all about productivity, driving results, delivering, competing. When you're fifth, you're fighting every day. And we have built some of the most capable, exceptional functional leaders. And as an airline, we've been recognized with awards. We're very proud to be #1 in our on-time performance. It's very important to us that we serve our guests at an exceptional level, and we have thus been recognized for it. But all of that comes at a cost, that as the complexity has gone up, the competition has increased, and now we ask our leaders to behave in a completely different way. We need them to, instead of delivering in almost like a manufacturing environment of delivering predictable results and process and deliver outcomes and help their folks be exceptional in that environment, that we now have to confront challenges that are new, and how do we make sure our leaders are equipped to solve problems in new ways? And that's one of the things that we're wrestling with right now as a company, is what skills do people need? What experience do they need to have? What behaviors do they need to learn? That maybe as a functional leader of exceptional capability, it just sort of didn't have room for that in what they've done. So I think one of the things you're hearing through the conversations, and really I'm taking away from this, there is a set of skills and behaviors, but it's also inspiration and courage. And how do we make sure that we're creating an environment where our leaders can exhibit that courage? I've been fortunate because I've moved around the company so often in 20 years. I don't have roots in a functional organization. So the idea of change and skilling up and learning new has been I've been on the continuous learning journey. A lot of it through experience, scars, wounds, stories to tell. But that isn't true for a good majority of the leaders at our organization, and that kind of sets up an interesting dilemma of how we solve that. We know that it's going to take ecosystems and partnerships and technology. We have a mobile workforce. We have 8,000 flight attendants that could be anywhere at any time. How do we help them? How do we help their leaders, who they may see once a month, really connect with their employees and drive what we're trying to accomplish? And how do we make sure that the entire team stays engaged as we move forward? So that just sort of sets a little bit of the context that I knew Kumaar was going to pummel me with questions. But just kind of set the stage of who we are and some of the challenges that we're looking at solving.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Antonio?
I have slides too. So what I'm going to talk is, it's a different angle to look at ecosystems. I call projects as temporary ecosystems. I have some slides here to show. I was chairman of the Project Management Institute, where we co-launched the Brightline initiative, and our whole focus was about transformation, connecting projects and strategy with reality. So that's where I'm going to be talking. I don't know if they can put the slides up, please. The concept that I'm trying to put together is called the project economy. Basically, with the speed of change and the aggressive competition, everything is becoming project-based. Not just organizations, but education. You can see that with the kids nowadays in school, they learn project-based, which is much more efficient way to learning. So I have used this new model to project the ecosystem and how they learn. Briefly on the project economy, if you don't mind, I'd like to stand here with you. It's always easier. So there's a lot of statistics which shows that there will be a huge increase on the amount of projects that we see. McKinsey talks about 57 trillion by 2030 just on infrastructure, and 2/3 will be in the development area. So there's a lot of need for good projects there. Also, that means that there's a shift in the workforce where most of us will be working in projects as we go forward. Kumaar was talking about the gig economy. The gig economy is project-based. Another research point for my book was how work gets done in organizations. I think Sandy was referring to that. We heard about organizational ambidexterity by Alex. So you have the blue side is the day-to-day activities. 100 years ago, there were no projects in organizations. There were just a few people involved in projects. Today, about 1/3 of organizations' employees work in projects part-time. Most of the people are just half-a-day job in the blue side, but they are being dragged into projects, which is change, innovation, new products, new organization, MMA. So you can see the shift of resources from the known and stable work towards the more uncertain and change. And the big issue is not that trend, which is a bit silent because it's not been addressed. But the big issue is when you have the guys at the end here, the robots and artificial intelligence, the impact that they will have with this balance where people will be working is going to shift radically. So forget about having a job description in the future. There's research from Accenture which shows that most of the jobs will be project-based. So I don't know, can you raise your hand? Who has a job description in their office, in their organizations? Raise your hand. Do you have job descriptions? This will disappear very soon. This will be gone. You will not have job descriptions. You will be working in projects for 6 months, 9 months, and then we'll see what happens after. So it's very scary because job descriptions give you security and some perspective. This will disappear. The other big change is a radical way of selling benefits. So companies very traditional like Philips, who are used to sell products, like you see scanners and MR machines, they will soon stop selling products because in a good year they sell 10 machines, 10 RI. They realize that by selling projects, they can engage with a hospital and say, we're going to build a hospital, we're going to run, and we'll put our machines in the hospital, but we can engage for 25 years, not just 10 products per year. So what you see is that selling products will disappear as well, and people in organizations will be selling projects where you deliver value. And the point I wanted to make on ecosystem, very briefly, 5 points. So I think projects are better ecosystems for 5 reasons. First, there's a common purpose. It's very clear when you have a project, there's a purpose and there's a deadline. So people know and they have focus to deliver. Second, there's cheaper access. You don't need to be Microsoft, Amazon, Apple to be part of that. You can access in any project where you share the purpose and where you add value. The same for the equal. You can start. It's small business, individuals can form part of these project ecosystems. It's much easier to build trust in ecosystems like projects. You connect much easier. And finally, the learning is essential. It needs to happen. So let me give you a few examples of projects, ecosystems, where many organizations, many individuals, corporate, public, were working together to achieve some bigger goals and a higher purpose. The first one, let me just give me a small statistic about learning, which shocked me when I heard about, and it's not to depress you, but most of the learning that happens to us as individuals happens when we're from 0 to 4. Yeah, when you have kids, you see they're sponges. That's about 60%. The rest big part happens between 5 and 11. Yeah, so 35. So you know that we can, after 12, it's very hard to learn. We learn, but not as much and not as easy. So it's a bit kind of depressing, but it's a bit of reality. And the other statistic on learning is we've been trained to learn lecture and reading, and that doesn't work anymore. So what you see is much more learning on the active side, which is basically what happens in project, is learning by doing, having some coaching, giving people, empower people to deliver. So a couple of examples just to finish. This was an amazing ecosystem project. You remember when in Chile, 33 miners were trapped 700 meters below. That required so much learning. In a couple of days, the people who were working on the project, different companies, different organizations, had to learn in a couple of days how mining works and how can we drill a tunnel which usually takes 3 months in 3 days. So the learning process was on the job and very, very intense because we wanted to save people's lives. This is one of the most amazing projects I've ever seen in a world where we're trying to fight against each other. In Central Africa, Rwanda, they had one of the worst genocides in history, recent history. Right after those terrible moments, the government said, we need to stop that. We need to start to get together. So they launched several projects to reunite the country. And they have achieved that after 20 years with the participation of citizens, with a lot of communication. Imagine the type of communication and training that you need to have after such a war and genocide. So they really work on these aspects to create that, yeah, we need to leave the past in the past, and we need to think ourselves as in the future. One of my favorite projects, the Sagrada Familia in Spain, is not finished. It's 100 years late, but who cares? Yeah, this is a project where learning happens through generations. And they say they will finish by 2026. I don't think so, but who cares? Because they're generating value every day. They're generating value every day. They're making millions every day. So who cares if the project is late? The learning happens with the generation. 2 more examples, and then I'm done. This one is the moonshot, very, very popular this year after the 15th anniversary. I think projects have the power of engaging everybody in a big, ambitious goal. And this happens with the moonshot when it was announced by the end of the 60s. But the picture that you see there, this is happening in 1967. The journalist went to the NASA to check how are we doing the project. So they interview everybody in the NASA space, the chairman. So at the end of the day, the journalists walk out of the office. They see a guy like that. They ask him, what's your name? My name is Miguel. What are you doing? I'm helping to put the first man on the moon. So the guy was cleaning the floor so that the people could come, the scientific people, work on the project the day after. But he was so engaged with that project that he felt he was part of the job. So this is so empowering, these ecosystems where you create the culture where everybody feels empowered. And the last one, I think this is a bit cynic, but the last time Europeans felt Europeans was when we introduced the euro. This is 2002, so projects where everybody, 300 million, were part of that ecosystem to make a huge transformation in a positive manner, successful, happened through a project which, unfortunately, later on was not followed up, but that can show you the power of projects, ecosystems, learning together to make a better world. Thank you, Kumaar. Thank you.
Thank you. So Young?
I'm going to stand. I don't have slides, but I'll stand just because I like to talk and walk at the same time, if that's OK. And it is afternoon before lunch, so and I'm also small, so I'll kind of stand here. So I think what we're talking about, and I really, actually, I would love to actually keep some of your slides up because they're actually perfect for what I'm talking about and really building off of this conversation. So I'll just share a few stats that are quite alarming. 5 billion, okay? There are 5 billion people in the world who have mobile phones. That is more than the number of people who have access to clean water. That's a different issue, but there are 5 billion people. There are actually 1 billion mobile workers that are actually coming in the next few years. 50% of tasks are going to be automated in the next few years with automation and AI. So we are actually facing a global crisis. So for most of these conferences that you'll go to, you'll hear governments and businesses talking about one of the top 3 issues they'll talk about is skills. How are we preparing the workforce of the future? Future of work. What are we going to do? And it's not just an economic or an academic issue. It's actually a social issue. In Nigeria, there are 17% unemployment among what they're tracking. If you get into the smaller age groups of probably 18 to 25, it's much, much higher than that. This is a national average. There are 5 million in South Africa. So if you think about what are these young people going to be doing if they're actually unemployed? So the question we have is how are we going to now talk about these platforms and these ecosystems and solve this problem at scale and speed? There are not enough faculty and physical classrooms in the world in order to solve this global challenge. So we're going to have to think very, very differently about the challenge, and we need platforms. So just out of curiosity, how many of you here are from the public sector? So publics could be academics, a lot of academics in the room, right, and government. How many of you from the private sector? Oh, a lot of in the private sector. And how many of you are platforms? You have technologies and different solutions. Okay? And so we're going to need to take this 4P approach, a public-private platform partnership approach. So the good news is that even among the people in this room, we probably have the capabilities and resources and know-hows, expertise to solve some of these problems, but we're going to have to collaborate. So now the question is, what do we need to collaborate on? So if you think about this whole adult learning, and I really, really loved Antonio's slide, which talked about learn by doing, right, in terms of actually participatory learning. So I'll just introduce a few concepts, because I'm kind of a nerd, too. And I like to think about these concepts from a scientific perspective, not just from a technology perspective. I'm not a technologist. I ended up creating Gnowbe, a mobile micro-learning tech solution, because there was a need in the market, not because I particularly think tech is cool, which I do think is cool, by the way. But in terms of the mindsets, in order to develop these skills and mindsets, we actually are going to have to take a different approach to developing skills. We cannot learn creativity and critical thinking skills, right, which is basically the top skills we have to learn for 21st century. We cannot learn them by watching videos. Right? Are you guys with me on that? You have to learn these skills through projects, through application, and through doing. Where are we dumping billions of dollars in digital learning? It's now become synonymous with videos. That is actually not the only way. Videos are very, very important for stimulating content and knowledge, but in order to actually put that into practice, we have to apply them on the job through application, which is what Sandy was talking about as well. So a concept I'll introduce based on the science of adult learning, Andrew Gaji. The idea of behavior design and gamification mechanics, which actually now can be used in technology, is a concept I'll call MPPG. So if MOOC was the idea of online learning 10 years ago, I'll introduce kind of a new concept called MPPG. Mobile first, participatory, personalized, and group-based learning. And MPPG is not just an acronym. And the mobile-first piece is not really just about the device itself. It's actually about empowerment. When you have mobile first, and because more people are accessing the internet via mobile now than the web, it's about the ability to empower people to learn anytime, anywhere. That 5% statistic is sad. And it's actually going to be insufficient because when we talk about lifelong learning, 50% of your tasks going away, now lifelong learning is no longer a nice to have. You don't have lifelong job security. There's no more job roles and job descriptions, right? And so because of that, we're going to have to do lifelong learning. So that 5% that Antonio just shared is going to have to be like half. It's going to have to increase significantly. So you need access to content anytime, anywhere. So that's the mobile first. The participatory element is actually that you have to engage in that learning experience. You have to learn by doing. You have to participate, reflect on what you've just learned, have a conversation, discuss it, debate it. And that's what's going to deepen that learning experience. Personalized learning. Now with technology, you can personalize all kinds of learning. You and I are sitting in this Drucker forum today. but we're all taking away very different things because we're filtering everything we're learning through our own set of contexts and experiences. So how do we then leverage that then to do group-based learning where we share best practices, we have conversations, and we share those experiences, which is what we're doing. So I'm learning just by sitting here, right? And I think we all are learning from each other. And the idea of one expert is, I think, is an outdated concept. We all have various experiences that we contribute, and it's more of a collaborative knowledge-sharing economy. So how do we then take advantage of that? So just a quick question. What was the acronym I just shared? Who wants to call it out? Active recall. We just did active recall, right? And you participated. So now your chances of remembering that have gone up significantly. Very simple. You can do the same thing using technology. So now when you think about the technology, you take very simple concepts like these, and by practicing it and by triggering and nudging through, and the mobile phone is amazing at behavior because it does this thing called notifications and pushes, which are actually really powerful behavior nudge mechanisms. And there's a lot of gamification techniques, that mechanisms built in that actually allow that. So that's kind of that. Then in terms of content, you need still content because you need professors and academics and thought leaders, and pretty much I think everyone in this room, or most people in this room are thought leaders on some topic, right? So we need your expertise. And that expertise, it's important now to actually have curation. There is too much content. There's no shortage of content in any language in the world now, right? So you think, how do you curate the best of the best to create credible, recognizable content so that based on jobs and based on the skills needed, that you can help people save time, right? And then how do you actually accredit and recognize that? I'll just share two stories around how we think about this 4P, the public-private platform partnerships, and how they're working. And I'll share two very extreme examples just to show like how they can work. So in South Africa, I talked about this 5 million unemployed youth situation. So there's a nonprofit called Yes for Youth that basically approached us and said, hey, we have this big challenge. The president of South Africa is involved, right? It's a big deal. The World Bank is partially funding it. And we need to provide jobs for these 5 million youth. So we have this amazing skills program, develop skills, we'll get them jobs. They tried that. What happened was they would get the jobs, and then shortly after they got the job, they would quit because they would result in their first failure. They get feedback. So they hear, oh, I'm not ready for work. Oh, I can't work. So the mindsets actually had to shift first. Or the moment they had a little bit of bump in the road, what do the rest of us do? You pick yourself up and you just keep going. It's another day of work. We don't think about it. But because they had never worked before, they actually had to understand what is the purpose of work. So it started with a mindset shift first. Then you teach them the skills after. And sometimes we actually forget about that mindset part. And so we had to embed in bite-sized pieces of content, and we had to deliver it in fun ways through animation and all kinds of stuff, so that we had to get them to actually talk about the mindsets first. So once you actually got the mindset shifted, then you were able to then see them getting very, very engaged in why they should work. Second example, and then I'll wrap up. Second example around financial services. So in terms of thinking about industry-driven content now, we've been collaborating with Skills Future Singapore, as well as Institute of Banking and Finance, to actually work with banks and insurance companies to take a very industry and market-driven approach to content creation. Say, what are the technical, and not just the technical, because we got a lot of that, what are the soft skills required as well, then to create learning and accredited pathways so that people can get jobs, whether it's a data analyst role, blockchain, cybersecurity and risk and compliance, so that we're actually combining those things using kind of the public-private platform partnership model. Happy to share more. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, now that the panelists have shared their views, I'll give mine. I just have about 96 slides, so just hold on to your seats. We'll just breeze through lunch, guys. No. Some great views there. I'm going to change the order, move from the left to right now. So Young, you mentioned some really good examples on how digital learning have worked in different environments and different contexts. What are some of the challenges you have faced in the implementation and adoption of digital learning? And where do you see some of the strengths emerging based on the implementation experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the biggest one is mindsets. So I think right now there are a lot of myths when it comes to digital learning. The myth one, digital learning equals videos. Myth number 2, you can't do soft skills development on digital. And you can't do learn by doing and learn by practicing. It has to all be done face to face. If that's the case, which is a sad case because we have billions of people we've got to train. Right, and so those are big myths. So the mindset shifts required has actually been the biggest challenge. And so how we're addressing that is actually by training people on mobile instructional design. It's not just a new skill set, but a new mindset, the new digital trainer. Who is the new digital trainer? What kind of skills do they have? What kind of mindsets? Designing for this little device has to be different, right? Than designing for a face-to-face versus designing for a PC. So as we think about human-centered design, how do you then train people, not just on the skills, but the mindsets and behaviors necessary? And that's a critical part of actually driving this change. The technology and solution alone, without that, I think doesn't really work quite so well.
So it's interesting. You have to tackle mindset change to be able to go after behavior change with your learning methodology.
Absolutely.
Right. Antonio, some phenomenal examples you gave about large-scale projects and what does that mean for the workforce. How are you looking at managing the career aspirations of these individual contributors, right? And what about their learning and development needs? So which project management company will look after them, and how do they do that?
Yeah, I come across many colleagues where I work in the past in banking or pharma, and they tell me, I've been working 20 years as risk officer, and suddenly my job was taken by a computer, and they say me, now you run this project. And I have no clue. I don't know what's a project. And so there's a lot of learning by doing, and you need to have interest of learning. The motivation has to be there. I think this is, if you're in consulting, this is what you do every time you start a new project. There's a phase of learning about the client, the competition, the key fundamentals, but day-to-day people don't have that habit and that agility to learn quickly so that in a week or two you can at least talk about the topic and be able to challenge your counterparts. So it requires more flexibility. You will never be precise 100%, but you'll be able to have the good conversations. There are, of course, some more and more business schools who are adopting project management as something that leaders need to know. It's not just the project people, but also the senior executives are a big player in projects, and they have no clue how to manage projects. It's often the missing gap where they don't like, they're afraid of the projects, they prefer in day-to-day operations. That's what they control, but they play a big role. So there's a huge, huge need to train senior executives to play an active role in projects, spending 1 or 2 days per week in transformation projects, which they don't do today. Very hard to do. And then you have, of course, the Project Management Institute, Brightline, who are trying to build those skills. So there is a lot. It's also the mindset of that she was talking about is so fundamental. But for sure, Kumaar, every people here in this room, you're going to be doing projects for the rest of your lives.
Can I add to that?
We all need to get PMI certified. I think that's the underlying message.
So Kumaar, I just want to add something to that, because I think, Antonio, what you're saying is so spot on. And I think that's why we're trying to address some of the gaps we have in our leaders. We have leaders who I said were conditioned, if you will, trained, raised, rewarded for driving execution and delivering results in a predictable process where the outcomes are known. And again, where I have been a little bit stand apart from my peers is I actually hired into Alaska Airlines as a project manager.
Wow.
And now I, as a managing director leading the organization, I have the project management office working with the executives on strategy and driving some of our transformation efforts. What I'm finding is the skills that the other leaders we need to create. It's critical thinking. It's how to lead through influence. It is not, it's moving away from maybe some more traditions of command and control. And it's also being very comfortable that you are not the expert in the room.
Correct.
And for a lot of our leaders, that is a little unsettling, a place of vulnerability. But because of my experience, I'm never the expert in the room. So it's really opened up a way to bring diverse voices in, to what you were saying, and really bringing out the best of everybody you need to deliver change. And so I just couldn't believe more. I think life is a series of problems to be solved. Just bring on the next one.
Thank you.
I agree with you.
Sandy, you're obviously, your company is going through a period of major change,
Yeah.
right? So you've got massive M&A, which has been done, a period of high growth. So you've doubled in terms of headcount in 5 years. What are some of the key learnings you've seen in terms of culture and, integration post the M&A, managing this high growth? What are some of the key learnings on the cultural side?
Yeah, I think it's almost too simplistic to say that the merger is done, because culture is the long tail.
Sure.
We brought two very different organizations together, and one was certainly larger than the other, but with the intent of we wanted to find the best of both. So one of the things that we did, and again, we're on this journey, is as the new collective company, we said, let's create our values together. Let's make sure we're starting from a place of shared values. And so it was a very engaged process using a platform of some sort, where we had all the employees had the opportunity to engage and really participate in helping us shape who our company is going to be going forward. So that is really, that level of participation also speaks to our culture. We're a very social culture. Connection and face is important. So in a mobile workforce, it's actually it's very challenging. But that whole idea of bringing people together to share goals and values that really start to set the stage of how we're going to behave, how we're going to take care of our guests, and how we're going to behave with one another, has really put us on a trajectory with a lot of work to do.
And how is it panning out with the people who've spent a long time in the organization vis-a-vis, let's say, some of the newer comers?
Yeah, for the folks who've been around longer than me, a number of them, if they weren't in the eye of the storm of the merger, they actually felt neglect. And we heard that from employees who said, what about us? We've built this company, we've been here for years, you've been all focused on attention on the merger and the new people. What about us? So we actually took all 23,000 people and brought them in, 600 at a time, to a venue where we were in the round for our frontline for our executive leaders to interact FaceTime. Could have probably used a mobile device here and there. But we thought it was important that at least that one time to bring everyone together to really have the opportunity to connect, so to let people air their concerns, to ask their questions. So we knew we were starting from a common ground as we move forward. And now we can look at technology and other ways to continue to move, but we're all starting from the same place.
Right.
And I think that was really important, because the people who were maybe getting a lot of attention, the people who maybe felt neglected, it was like, okay, with that body of work behind us, a lot of big projects, we're now here together, and how do we want to move forward together?
Nice.
Interesting. So a lot of empowerment.
Yeah,
as a subcontext.
It was interesting thinking about this panel. One of the challenges we have is our employees have forever been empowered to do the right thing and take care of guests. Do the right thing after safety safety is number one in terms of our values. We have to operate a safe airline because of the risks and complexity in the industry. But that said, next is do the right thing. We empower our employees. They're given a framework, so not a rigid set of policies and procedures, but a framework so that they can do the right thing. What we're finding is our leaders are lacking some of that empowerment now. Again, they've been driving execution, deliver results, and their folks have been empowered. So now we're trying to figure out how to unlock and empower our leaders to have that same sort of framework in which they can operate and really more effectively help us take the bigger, larger airline forward. Yeah.
Got that. I think our next panelist has some answers to some of the questions facing all of us. Santiago, at IE, you're obviously driving some amazing initiatives. And, given the fast-changing environment on both sides, for business and for academia, right? There's obviously a need for newer models and doing things differently. Please share with us some of the things that you're currently doing and where you see the sort of intersection between academia and business will emerge.
Sure. Allow me first to react also to some of the presentations and comments, because I very much agree with Sandy about the need of focusing actually on leadership, no, within organizations. And I find Antonio's very appealing presentation focused on project management as a source of learning skills, a very valuable approach. But at the same time, you know, and allow me to challenge you,
Of course.
it's very engineering, you know, based in terms of, I mean, it's typical, you know, from let's focus on a very concrete, narrow objective, which is limited in time, which probably requires the skills of everyone who's actually attached to the project, but it doesn't have to do necessarily with enhancing the leadership skills that management looks for. And I always recall the quote from Peter Drucker, who, while he was attending the seminar of John Maynard Keynes at Cambridge University, he said that the rest of the audience was interested in learning more about the behavior of commodities, whereas he was actually interested in learning on the behavior of people. No? So management is actually about leading others. It's not about managing a project or managing a task. No? The second challenge, you know, that I have to Antonio, of course, evidence shows that we can only learn 5% of the knowledge that we gather after passing, you know, the barrier of 30 years. But this is precisely the challenge that educators have, because we now, those who are now in our 60s, will probably have to live still, you know, the second half of our lives. So unless we find ways of learning how we can still continue to learn, and educators and technology, and this is probably the major contribution of technology here, and you also know a lot about this, because you're actually researching on how to increase memory and many other intellectual facets. So educators need to focus precisely on how to enhance all the potential of humans to learn after they pass the barrier of the 50-year age. No? And technology can help us a lot here. Even if it's only, you know, the 5% that we can still learn, that's a major percentage. And science actually shows that when people attend a demanding program, along with people who are very diverse, and this is the point precisely about diversity, when you meet with very diverse people, then that's actually a source of richness and knowledge. No? But when even if you have passed the 50-year age, if you attend a demanding program where you have to study and put all your faculties at the extreme, then you can actually renew your neurons. The brain, you know this very well, has this plasticity that can actually expand and regenerate. So this is the good news. The bad news, of course, is that science is not progressing at the speed that we would like. But anyway, we can actually learn still a lot, and my recipe here would be actually to create much more diverse bodies within companies and within educational units in terms of cross-generational diversity, because we can actually, the seniors can actually learn a lot from the youngsters, and the other way around. Of course, diversity in terms of gender, sexual orientation, visions of the world, visions of the good life. That's the real source of richness in learning, along with many of the technology devices that we are now implementing. So my conclusion, and this is actually coming from our experience at IE, is that diversity, providing a real diversity environment, is actually one of the major sources for learning in any possible context, both at corporations as well as at universities.
And you know, one thing that comes up when you say that, and going back to your slide of 0 to 4, 5 to 11, when you're young and you're learning, there's no judgment.
No.
So you have a freedom, and everything is new, and you're a sponge. I think as an adult, one of the challenges, and especially for leaders to develop new skills, is how do you create an environment at the workplace. I think academia, going to a university, gives them a space. It's a conscious decision to say, I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to, you know, exhibit some humility that I don't know everything and I have to put more information in. I think when it's happening in the workplace, how do you do that in a way that people don't feel overexposed to say, I don't know everything? Because they got to this leadership position because they were good at something, or good at everything, or good at a lot of things. And I think that that's really important, of creating a safe space to say, we want to tap into the parts of your brain So you have to show up in a way that, and create an environment where people can be vulnerable and safe so that they're open to that new information.
No, yeah.
I like that.
Antonio, taking on from what Santiago mentioned about project management, you know, let's
I don't know
look
if I
at
should sit between you two.
I very much like Antonio's presentation, to be very honest. I wonder whether you're an engineer, but
So, you know, what about people who are not doing projects in the same organization, right? Who are just moving on from one organization to another, just doing projects, right? What about their need for a leader, a mentor? You know, because in a traditional environment, they would have had a boss for maybe 5 or 10 years or whatever that period is, and an organization which would look after their you know, future learning needs, you know, domain skills, technical skills, managerial skills, so on and so forth. So how do you see that playing out? I mean, we can understand within the company there'll be rotation within projects and it's all good.
Yeah.
But
It's first I want to address Santiago. You're right. Project management has been seen very engineer, has been developed by engineers for engineers. So yes, the old project management was like that. Now we're talking more about project leadership, transformation leadership. So much stronger on the leadership and the business knowledge, or the and less on the tools. Which anyway, technology is going to disrupt 80% of the old project management. That's going to be done by machine in 10 years. So absolutely good observations. We're not talking about project management, it's project leadership. The second point is, I'm sure you all have friends who left their companies and say, well, I'm a bit afraid to become independent because you don't have that vision, you don't have that security. But I've not come across any of my colleagues or friends who said, I want to go back. After the uncertainty of, they love the freedom, they love the ability to choose which projects they want to work, they learn new things. So it's just, you feel you're going to go into a cliff, and I know that it requires courage, it requires learning new skills, using your network, being more upfront of selling yourself. But the people I've seen, and many jumping from consulting to independent, from companies to independent, they love it. They love their project work, and I've never very hardly see anybody coming back. So I think sooner or later we're going to be there and working in smaller ecosystems, smaller projects, bigger projects. But that's the way I think 1/3 in the US is happening now. So yes, it's a challenge, but it's more mental than actually a problem.
so basically that is shifting the onus of learning from the organization to the individual.
Individual.
Right? The motivation to stay ahead, right? And so Young, you know, that's an area where you're focusing on. What are some of the trends there right now? You know, not just for organizations, but for individuals who want to say, hey, I want to, you know, stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I think that it's, first of all, I think understanding context for learning is really important. So understanding the different learning motivations and personas. And so you actually recognize that in a corporate setting or for professional, I may learn something because I want to achieve something to do better at my job. Other people learn in organizational context because they just want to look good in front of their bosses and get promoted, right? And other people learn because they love to share knowledge with other people, you know? And so there's different kinds of motivations. So I think, first of all, understanding that not all learners are created equal, you know, the diversity point, you know, that you're making, I think is important. But I think in terms of actually the trends, I think the idea of individuals taking greater ownership over their learning experiences, I think is really, really kind of a big thing. And companies are now providing opportunities for people to choose what they want, their own individual pathways. There's some stuff that's actually the stuff that the company needs to teach, but the rest of it is actually how do you then customize and empower. So I think for the more forward-looking organizations, they're looking even at how they can continue to empower people. And then this whole idea of like the skills passport, where I can take my skills with me wherever I go, is also emerging, where it's not really about the resume anymore, but about the skills that I can take that cut across different jobs and different industries.
Very interesting.
Very interesting.
Santiago, you've got a great new partnership. Well, I wouldn't say new, but a successful partnership with FT. And that's obviously a different model on leadership development and managerial education. Tell us a little bit about that experience and where do you see that going ahead?
We realize that lifelong education is probably the reference for many of us throughout life, since we need to not just update our skills, our technical skills, but also the deep knowledge that we need to renovate. So some years ago, we realized that maybe academic institutions alone could not fulfill this major mission. Sure. So we thought that there could be lots of synergies by joining forces with a leading media company like the Financial Times, given the contents that they produce, given the profile of their editorial journalists. And the formula is actually working very well. What we actually do is bringing their thoughtful leaders, the FT columnists on global affairs or the economy, bring them into class, and you know that they provide a very neutral approach to many major issues that managers are attending. They are probably more neutral, allow me to say, than consultants, who many times, you know, try to provide their own recipe or their own model. And of course, we also bring our own faculty members, and the synergy is evident, and executives love this very much. So the company is actually growing now in Europe and the Middle East. But allow me, you know, maybe a question, if I may, no, at this stage, because of course the title of the conference is very appealing, and we love the word ecosystems, no? It's very rounded, no? And who shouldn't endorse, you know, talking about this grand word of ecosystems? But my warning is companies and organizations are not systems as we know them in biology or in the physical world, no? And this is probably the source of many errors when we try to model organizations and companies and decision-making models on the basis of biology. We may take the wrong decisions because, you know, we humans who lead organizations and managers operate in a very different way, and there's lots of things that make companies become different entities to systems. So let's not model our management theories on an assumption which is not entirely true. I don't want to question the title of the conference at all, because it's still, you know, very rounded, no?
Sure. Sandy, you're probably facing some of what Santiago just mentioned, you know, in terms of looking at the nature of organizations, you know, integration and change. What are your views on, you know, how that decision-making, how those systems and processes sort of need to be undertaken?
Yeah, I think it's finding the balance, and we've heard a lot of that through different presentations of the operations and execution of the core business, and then how that you position the people, the decisions, the projects, the investments for growth. And as we, and every organization is resource constrained and confronts those challenges, it's making sure we have the right mindset and maybe some of the skills that we need to make those choices, because the choices that we made 5 years ago wouldn't work in today's environment. And so how do we keep on our toes, and how do we keep abreast of what's happening, not just within the organization, within our culture, but what's happening outside of us, to make sure that we're positioning ourselves where we need to be. We have, I think to your point about how do you partner to get the different perspectives, because that'll stimulate the thinking. That's been some areas that we've explored, giving employees access so they can pace themselves, bringing people in to talk to us to just give us a different perspective on the world. So we're trying a lot of different things. I think what we're still trying to figure out is what's the right cocktail, if you will, what's the right menu and recipes for different leaders and parts of our organization or levels to help them stay on a track and trajectory that positions them for the next opportunity when it comes. And that's we're in that throes right now of trying to make heads or tails of that.
Right. Well, at this juncture, I must ask the audience, has everyone had a good breakfast? Yeah, because we are running into lunch hour, and we started the session probably 10 minutes late. So is it okay if we continue for another 10 minutes? Yeah, can we hold on to our appetite for 10 minutes? Yeah, great. So on that note, we'll open it for questions from the audience, and I see several hands going up. First off, the gentleman right here. Is somebody passing on the mics? Yes.
Well done, Sandy. Nice, lovely.
You too.
Nice.
I want to talk more about,
Yeah.
about your PMI stuff. The PMO started to report to me on Tuesday,
Really?
right before I left for here.
Thank you for a very interesting discussion from all the panelists. I'd like to add a nuance to the discussion about projects. Because for me, there's two kinds of projects. There's projects where the target is fixed, but the journey is dynamic. And I think project leadership is well suited for that. The project type that I spend my time on as a professor of entrepreneurship is when neither the target or the process and journey is fixed.
Yeah.
And this is what I call an entrepreneurial project. And for me, this introduces a whole set of new elements that are a move away from the engineering model and much more to the humanist model of project management. And
Yeah.
and connects
Absolutely.
ever so importantly with Santiago's comments about diversity. And so if that's the case, I would like to, I think the words active and passive in learning are familiar and useful. But I think there's a third component, which is reflection. After you do something, you actually need to step back and figure out what happened, particularly if it's something you were doing for the first time. Learning takes place in reflection. And so it isn't just either being passive or being active. And the vocabulary that I think is moving in as we look at new models and technology is related to, in some instances, learning is directed by others. In some instances, learning is directed by self. And the utopian model that I think we're moving toward is when learning is determined by self.
Right.
That we're not actually being given what we need to learn. It's part of a journey of discovery. And that connects with the idea of an entrepreneurial project, if you will.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Lady up here. Yeah.
Thank you. Question to So-Young. I work in the domain of learning, and lately I get a lot of questions around this motivation topic that you mentioned. I get questions and comments around, from young people particularly, why should I learn? What is in it for me? Which I kind of find quite difficult to tackle with the given, theories of learning. Why should you learn? Lifelong learning. Do you have or any one of you have an answer for that? It very much feels like, I want to learn now and I want to get something immediately. And this, for you, lifelong learning, get something out of it, doesn't seem to work.
I'm not going to pretend to have the answer to that question because I think it depends on the young person.
Yeah.
But I'll just share with you a story. So there's a group of high school students in Palo Alto who actually reached out and they said, hey, we actually did some research and we found your company, your startup, and we think it's interesting. We would like to work with you guys for the next year. And what we would like to do is create our own programs to teach other people that are in need. So we did a little brainstorming with them to try to identify different topics, sustainable development goals, support for small, medium-sized businesses. So what they actually did is we never actually told them to learn anything. It was actually an agreement around a problem to solve, a project to actually have, or something that they were passionate about helping this community, and naturally in that process, learning will take place. So it was never learning for learning's sake. It's, you're going to learn because I tell you to learn because it's good for you kind of thing. Medicine, it's let's go do that, and in the process of doing that, you will learn. And the learning they will take on the SDG goals, for example, is probably beyond any kind of course they'll be able to take as they create their own content, which is learned by teaching.
Nice.
I think I would just add, it's like finding the motivation. So what matters to them?
Yeah.
So in our organization, our flight attendants and our customer service agents at airports and our call center agents, they care so deeply about everyone that they come in contact with. It's sort of like a magic of our hiring is a piece of it. There is some training, but really it's genuine of who we bring into the organization and who thrives. So anything that we say is going to help them better serve. They want to they want to make a difference in people's lives, then they come and they want to learn because that's satisfying for them. So I think it's getting into finding out what gives them meaning, and sometimes it may even be belonging, and then they'll lean into the learning.
My question is for Antonio, but it picks up on So-Young and Sandy's point about motivation. The example you gave, Antonio, of the 33 Chilean miners caught underground, 2,200 feet under the ground. That's a mind-blowing task. It was executed successfully, as you said, in 3 days. So beyond the motivation and the meaning, what factors led that to be done? Because if we tried to plan to do that, we would have planned, and it would have taken us months. You know, what were the factors that enabled that amazing example of a project being executed in such a rapid speed?
Yeah, this is one of these projects that you study how come that work and a big website doesn't work. So this, when you're trying to solve problems which start with humans, the purpose is clear. There's nobody challenging your project. Most of the projects are challenged everywhere. M&A, or why do we do that? So, but this one, there was no one. Then resources. When you have the resources working on that project on 100% dedication, that project has more chances. And priorities for Chile at that moment, to 20, that project was priority number 1. So you get all the attention, you get all the decision making very quickly. So you accelerate that project on the top one with 100% dedicated people with a clear purpose and a very strong deadline. Those projects are the best, but companies don't do that.
I think what you find is everyone nods that that's the clear purpose. We share that purpose. But I have a secret agenda of what I want, and you have a different one. And so I think part of it, sorry, that's just experience I've had, is like you have to expose and pull out.
Absolutely.
What else are people trying to get out of this effort? Yeah. Because I think that it ends up being sabotaging. It could sabotage what you're trying to accomplish. We find competing goals to really be sometimes at the heart of when we're struggling to execute on something.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that too, meaning making is so important for, especially for adults. So I tell people, just assume that the word you said and the words that were on the page, everyone in the room has a different definition and meaning of that thing that you wrote. So if you just assume that everyone has a different point of view on it, then it's a pleasant surprise when there's alignment, but you actually have to break it down because everyone has a different set of meanings that they associate with those words.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben. 2 more.
Hi, thanks for an interesting panel. I'm James Fleck from the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And from that you can judge that I've spent a lot of my life teaching. My question is, in this new ecosystem of learning, what is the role of the teacher and how is it changing?
Great question.
I love this.
Santiago,
yeah.
do you want to?
Could I jump?
Yes.
Well, it's decisive. If I may answer your question promptly, and shortly, it's decisive. Of course, it's changing since the teacher becomes more the orchestrator of the learning process. It's not anymore a question of conveying knowledge, and this we know because participants come to class many times with more information, more updated knowledge than the one that the professor possesses. But anyway, we need to train our faculty members to use technology effectively in class, because this is probably the major barrier that now that is now between the faculty members and the students. And I guess that many companies present here are probably developing apps and systems in order to assist our faculty members in order that they play their role in a much more effective way. But you probably recall that Bill Gates, many years ago in his first book, actually said that technology was not going to replace professors at all. We may rely on Alexa for some very basic matters in terms of conveying knowledge, but still the eureka experience, the awe experience that a major professor can actually convey to their students is something unique that will probably prevail. And still, artificial intelligence is far from producing a perfect professor still these days.
Sure. So we'll take this last question now.
Yes, just a question on the gender flip of some of what you've been talking about. And my question about the word, of course, diversity. Who ever thought of women as a diversity dimension, and why do we keep framing gender balance as a diversity? And in the whole learning space, now that actually the majority of university graduates globally are female, is learning itself gendered? And what do we do with all these boys who don't seem very interested in the idea? And so young, do we see this online? Is that also going to encourage more women, or are we going to balance education back into something a little bit more 50-50?
Ma'am, some amazing questions. I think we've got enough content there for a whole new panel.
I'll just add one comment.
Indeed.
4% of our pilots are women. That's a problem.
Yeah.
Less than that are people of color.
Yeah.
That's a problem. So when I look about it, I think one of the questions, to add more questions to the next panel, would be also in what industries, in what lines of work, and what job opportunities are we ensuring that we're going after some of the diversity, right? So I just would call that out as a point. Like we have a real problem.
No, it's a huge global issue, but I think that, the idea of digital actually can start to level the playing field, because when you're looking at digital learning per se, it's gender blind, it's background blind. The experience is the experience. And so the idea that you're able to then, regardless of gender, regardless of background, you're able to then learn and develop yourself at a pace and a speed. So that's why in some ways you can actually take away a lot of the subjectivity in these, when you're doing these, let's say, mobile micro degrees or whatever it is, in order to give them the skills that they need. And so like for like, if they have the technical soft skills that they need for that job compared to someone else, it's very that it starts to level the playing field. And even if you don't have the academic background, which typically in resumes we look at, I think the resumes are gone, right? So you take skills and you say, if I have the skills, I can demonstrate those skills. Maybe I didn't have the family background to go to that university. I have the skills and I can demonstrate that. So I think there's a lot of, there's a huge role for technology to play in democratizing and creating more inclusion, I think in the decisions that we're making. But we have a lot of work to do.
Maybe just that I'm doing some research, but there is some kind of evidence that women are better in projects, leading projects, but they don't dare to take the step. They're afraid of the failure or being in front, but yes, they tend to be better because the emotional intelligence and the discipline. So yeah, there is a big opportunity there.
If I may just also comment very big, because Kumaar was right. I mean, this can allow us for another full, not just one panel, but many, no? And educators, we have actually, a major challenge there, because we have to see how we have to change many different processes, the language as well. If you focus on fields like philosophy, which has been the domain of male for centuries, no? There's lots of things to be done on that particular front. But let's look at management, another field, And it's not just gender diversity, as Sandy was saying, but it's also, visions of the world, race, many other topics. So we definitely need educators to jump into this field and see how we can actually train our students to face a very different world.
Great. On that note, we'll bring this panel to a close. Thank you for being a fantastic audience. And a huge round of applause for all our panelists.
That was fun. Yeah.